The following podcast is a little fiery but mostly peaceful. If you're an automaton, turn away now and shelter in place. If you're a Catholic ready to renew your prescriptions of red pills and white pills, stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Catholics Aren't Zombies. I'm your host, Chris Munier. Thank you for joining me again. All right, so I want to take a revisit to episode 7 where I talked about holding women accountable. And what I'm going to do is kind of go over that a little bit again. I'm not going to go over every aspect of it, but I want to really focus in on that particular issue of abortion. And if you recall, in episode 7, I talked about the various things that women are really screwing up, even in Catholic land, even within the church, to where nobody really holds them to the fire or administers any sort of consequences, social, legal, or otherwise. And so I mentioned things like the creation of pornography, like all the immodesty, all the bad behavior, even things like not getting married, but also not even having the same proportional commitment to religious life as men do. And I demonstrated how in the church, the sacraments are on decline all over the place, but women, despite being very visible members of the church still, they don't fulfill their vocations the way they used to, even though you think that there would be a resurgence of that in the church because everything's catered to them. So I'm not going to go over all of that again. I invite you to check out episode 7, but I want to focus on this abortion thing, holding women accountable on abortion, because we really, really don't do it. And this is the one we're screwing up the most. Even amongst faithful Catholics, the folks that should get it, the ones I think sort of get it, they're pro-life. They know that the whole thing is wrong. It's evil. They know Planned Parenthood's a problem. They might even have heard of the American Eugenics Society. They may be aware of the potential for radical depopulation and all that stuff. There's plenty of people who get what the problem is, but they won't make the very appropriate deduction that women should be held accountable on this, basically as first-degree murderers. People don't have the guts to come to that conclusion, even though that's exactly where the logic leads you. How do I get to that? Now, how do I explain that women are culpable for the sins of abortion? Well, it should be obvious. Legally speaking, it's not like their husbands, boyfriends, or, whoever's on the other side of the fornication. It's not like they can say or do anything to procure an abortion. It always takes some level of consent from the woman involved, from the woman who got pregnant. Now, what people like to do to try to, push women's culpability down or to, mollify the situation is to say, well, you know what? They were pressured into it. They got cajoled and tricked into it. When the real victim, of course, is the unborn child. But in our love of women, our worship of everything female, they can't do anything wrong, daddy's little princess, we take this to the extent of completely exonerating them for what it basically amounts to being first-degree murder. It's not like you just waltz your way down to Planned Parenthood clinic on a whim. They think this through, and they go through with it. I mentioned in episode 7 that there's basically 2 reasons for why they do it. They do it because they don't think they could handle it economically, the economic burden of having a child and raising a child. Nobody thinks adoption's an option anymore for some reason. And then the other one is that it usually diminishes or puts a halt to their ability to fornicate. And the women these days, they want to go out and be obnoxious and fornicate just as much as the men do. That's one of those men acting like women and women acting like men sort of things. But you get this really ugly pushback from people, even within the church, even within traditional Catholic circles, about women being victimized in this situation. And in all but rare instances, I don't think that's true at all. If we can reverse engineer what leads to the abortion, we can see how this is the case. Okay, because abortions don't just come out of thin air. There's a whole sequence of events that have to occur to get anywhere near abortion. You got to do one of 2 things to have an unborn baby that could even be aborted, right? You got to do one of 2 things: have sex and conceive of a baby, or these days you've got the voodoo genetic, in vitro fertilization. Now, leaving aside the small number of cases in that second category, and that's really obvious, crying out loud. If you in vitro your way to a baby and then abort it, what the hell does that say about you? We ought to toss those women off a freaking cliff. But leaving aside that, you've got all these women, okay, babies don't come about accidentally. There's things that go into it. So, okay, we know that it would have to be sex. And unless it's within marriage, it's fornication. Now, are you going to tell me they were coerced into that too? Well, yeah, unfortunately, I know. Yes, in fact, people will go that route. But this is where you got to reverse engineer things even further. Okay, so what led to the fornication? Well, you might want to say, oh, there was some guy that they got the poor girl drunk, seduced them, manipulated them, took them back to their cave, and, the woman just couldn't do anything to resist. All right, this is ridiculous. Because if we take it back yet another step further back in the causal mechanism, we can see that that's bogus as well. Where did the woman go, or what did she do to set herself up to be in the circumstances that would enable fornication? The so-called pressuring that everybody talks about, that ultimately leads to a pregnancy and then to an abortion. Well, they probably, at least up until very recently, they went to a bar, they were dressed like crap with their dress hiked up to their thigh, cleavage all over the place. Look at me, look at me, I'm so pretty. Buy me free drinks. And they think that that's all it would amount to, is they get free drinks. They put on this big old immodest display for attention. Maybe naively they think that it is just a, get free stuff out of the guy sort of thing. Okay, fine. But the very act of doing that level of immodesty, is wicked in and of itself. And that indicates intent. They weren't coerced into that. They weren't pressured into that by guys. They went out, they wanted the freaking attention, they did it deliberately, they premeditated it. I mean, you see how crazy some of their get-ups are? All that freaking makeup and pancake, the short dresses, the high heels. None of this is cheap, by the way. I mean, how much does a pair of high heels cost? Maybe they're really, 12-inch whore ones are not that expensive. But the point is, there's some brain activity, some intent, some deliberation that has to go into this. And all of this mitigates this idea that women are not culpable, that they had no role to play in the entire process. Let's take it yet another direction, because you might say, well, darn, we've got all these lockdowns right now. It's not as if as many people are going out to clubs and indulging these hedonistic environments that are just cesspools for fornication. I mean, that's got to be on the decline, right? And I think to some extent you'd be right. If you're in California, New York, some of these really heavily locked down areas, that's probably true. The sheer ability to go out and, dress like a whore, bait guys into getting free drinks, that's probably a little bit on the decline just because of the last year or so. But one thing that's not on the decline at all, not only the pornography out there that women are making to hook guys in, but how about just good old-fashioned Tinder? All right, Tinder's not gone, and nor are any of the other 100,000 apps out there that do the same thing. That stuff's still there. You have all these women, some of them Catholic, all these women out there who are dressing themselves up like whores, taking very deliberate pictures with half a foot of cleavage showing, with the intent of drawing in the beta male simp types to come and fornicate with them. Again, these things don't happen accidentally. If you see that there is a causal chain that leads up to abortion, and that abortions don't just happen in a 5-second window, you can see where there is culpability. There is deliberate, premeditated intent. So that does away with this idea that, they're just pressured into it. Really? Were they pressured into dressing like crap? Were they pressured into wearing whore makeup? Were they pressured into dressing that way at work? Okay, I know, here's another objection I hear every now and then, that women, they dress that way because of peer pressure, with in-group peer pressure. So in other words, their girlfriends, they all do it, and so in order to fit in with the society and not be a pariah, they go and do it too. Even that proves my point, that women do this to each other. And sure, fine, you might have a, Madonna figure or somebody like that, the singer Madonna, who is the one that spearheads this sort of thing. But you can't blame it all on some crazy celebrity that starts this sort of trend. And as bad as that is, it's not the only aspect of it. There have to be any number of, middling or semi-alpha women who get the ball rolling on that too. And then you also have to have these women who cave into envy, they cave into pride. They don't have any fortitude to withstand this sort of thing. And at least by virtue of weakness, they go along with the immodesty. And the immodesty leads to the sex. It's outside of marriage, so it's automatically fornication. The fornication, if their birth control doesn't work, which is another problem, That leads to an unwanted pregnancy. If they're unwilling to put it up for adoption or actually take ownership and take care of the child, then you end up having an abortion. So these things have a discernible path. It's not a mystery. It's not just, oh, woe is me, the poor girl, 20 years old, totally manipulated, totally alone in the world. Daddy made her go do it. In the old days, you had shotgun weddings, right? That was a little more coercive. That was kind of how they dealt with unwanted pregnancies back in the old days. Back when it was still less common, too. As far as I've observed, and we could dispute this a little bit, I don't believe that there's anybody's daddy out there who's coercing any women to go and get abortions. I don't think this happens much. At the very least, I don't believe there's much indisputable evidence of it. There is, on the other hand, a whole mountain of evidence that daddy just lets daddy's little princess do whatever the hell she wants, and that she makes most of these awful decisions very unilaterally, up to and including the grave sin of abortion, which is, yes, it is morally speaking the worst thing that we are doing right now. Some people want to call it child sacrifice. I don't even think it's child sacrifice. A sacrifice implies that you actually value what it is you're giving up and allowing to be killed. Abraham valued Isaac, so it would have been a sacrifice if he had to kill him at the behest of God. What these women are doing is even worse. They don't value this great blessing that they've been given in the form of a child and in the form of a family. No, they're completely ungrateful, and we can see from the very early stages in their decision-making that they have no holy intent almost anywhere down the line. It's just so hard to feel sorry for these young ladies, and I know they weren't parented terribly well. I just got done talking about, daddy letting daddy's little princess be daddy's little princess. That's ultimately, in many ways, daddy's fault. I've criticized this before. I criticize it directly in Caesar Vacantism. It's chapter 23, episode 7 deals with it as well. So I've talked about this. We can go back and, we can rehash it all we want. But at the end of the day, especially when it comes time for judgment, your particular judgment, I don't think this is going to fly. There is hardly anybody that's putting a gun to these young ladies' heads, telling them to dress up like a hussy to go out clubbing. For that matter, there's nobody that's putting a gun at their head, telling them to wear the tightest possible spandex imaginable that shows off every crack and crevice in the gym or running down the street. Are you telling me that's female peer pressure as well? Well, it has the same effect. It's the same amount of vainglory and complete disregard for anybody else around them in terms of what that would elicit, in terms of lustful thinking on the part of men. Us guys are weak. Even at our best, we're going to struggle with that. And so unless we even know to avert our eyes from that, we're totally sitting ducks. All of this put together, everything I've said, is an absolute hurricane of a problem, perfect storm of a problem that sets us up for this abortion thing. I'm going to repeat it once again. I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but this abortion issue does not emanate from a vacuum. It's not something that popped up over the last 30 years. 50, whatever it is. This didn't come out of nowhere. It's tied to the sexual revolution. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows what went into that. And they know darn good and well that both sexes were culpable. It wasn't just guys. And I say that as somebody that would really like to beat down most guys. But we also need to beat down the women. We need to hold them accountable. And I'm going to close out one final note, one final thing I want to mention, and then I'll end this. Our Lady of Fatima gave us a lot to think about in terms of what hell is like. She exposed this to tiny children, not even 12 years old, I think, the oldest. Back in 1917, exposed them to visions of hell, gave them prophecies related to the world wars that were going to hit. The Second World War, they were already in World War I. How bad that was going to be, how bad communism was going to be later on. But then there's another more subtle aspect of Our Lady of Fatima and the various apparitions that gets pushed aside a little bit. And it's how Our Lady mentions that there would be immodest fashions that would greatly offend our Lord. So here we go. Immodest dress. That's what she's talking about. And now correct me if I'm wrong, but nowhere in the apparitions is there even any mention of things like abortion. There's no mention of fornication. There's mentions of pleasures of the flesh and how that's what doomed a lot of souls to hell. But the most specific aspect that she warns the children about is the immodest fashions. And I think this is because that is the critical antecedent variable. That's where it begins. Immodesty leads to lust. Lust leads to fornication. Fornication leads to unwanted pregnancy. unwanted pregnancy leads to abortion. And if you see that there are various stages involved with this, you can see that there are also a whole sequence of decisions, and each and one of those decisions is a test to whether the man and the woman involved are going to be holy or not. And the fact that we got this far into the abortion problem, not just occasionally, but like all the time, it shows us that men and women alike have been incredibly wicked, and they have done it with full knowledge and full intent, which means this is gravely sinful and their souls are greatly endangered. This is a big part of why we are being chastised. The only way to reverse this, prayer, fasting, but on a social level, we are going to have to hold people accountable. Hold women accountable. Hold them accountable for abortion. Yes, it's first-degree murder. No, they're not victims on it. There's probably a few, maybe a few instances where there are. There's always those weird cases that turn out to be the exception. The exception does not disprove the rule. That's all I got for you folks. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, visit my website, ditchthestateloveholychurch.com. Subscribe. Please subscribe. And check out my book, Caesar Vacantism, Rendering to Caesar When Caesar Goes Nuts, available on Amazon. Other than that, have a good one. Cue the music.